necklaces and unique symbols, where the swirling patterns mesmerize their gaze and conceal something even more ancient than words can tell. Beneath that shimmering metallic layer lies a civilization that left no pyramids or grand stone arenas but manifests through every pattern, festival, weapon, and legend. You might have heard of them, if not through myths, then as a familiar name in the football village. This is one of the only 7 clubs in the world to have won over 100 titles, specifically 120 major and minor titles by 2025, but most among European clubs. When founded in 1887, the team's name was chosen to emphasize the origin and cultural identity of both Irish immigrants and native Scots. And that club's name is Celtic. But looking broadly, this is not just a football team but a symbol of a culture once renowned across Europe. The heritage of the Celts, people who settled on the Western Islands, who built a distinct civilization with battle swords, epic songs, and sacred rituals in oak forests. Let's explore together in today. Origin of the Celts. Celtic. Later, General Julius Caesar, upon encountering the Gauls, recorded that they called themselves Celts. But then this name completely disappeared in the flow of European history. It wasn't until the early 18th century that it was revived. In modern times, archaeologists and linguists have reconstructed and used the term Celt to refer to people speaking Celtic languages in the Indo-European family, such as the Scots, Irish, Manx, Welsh, Cornish, or Bretons. However, the origin of this community is not uniformly established, and 3 main hypotheses have been proposed to explain their formation and spread. The first hypothesis suggests that the Celts developed from Iron field culture starting 3,300 years ago in the Bronze Age. The development of iron tools gave rise to the Hallstatt culture in Central Europe around 2,800 years ago, polymetallic culture from about 2,450 years ago, then expanding across Europe and parts of Asia. The second hypothesis is that the Celts came from the West. Accordingly, the Celtic language did not develop from Central Europe but from Atlantic regions like Britain, Ireland, Brittany, and Iberia in the 3rd millennium BCE, spreading from west to east, contrary to traditional views. A more reconciliatory approach is Patrick Sims-Williams' theory of Celts from the center. This theory posits that ancient Celtic formed in an intermediate area, possibly central France, specifically Gaul around the 2nd millennium BCE, then branched out and spread through trade, marriage, and cultural exchange, rather than large migrations. This view explains the diversity of Celtic languages and similarities with Italic languages in the Indo-European family, notably Latin. Meanwhile, archaeology suggests that the Celts did not form from a single center but from a network of diverse communities, developing independently but sharing some common traits. Because in other places, Celts have very distinct characteristics, such as the Iberian Celts in Spain, the Lepontic people in northern Italy, or the Galatians in Turkey. Similarly, linguistic evidence reflects this dispersion, such as Lepontic in Italy, Gaulish in France, and Celtiberian in Spain. Genetics has provided additional objective evidence of the connection between Celts and ancient migration ways. More specifically, ancient DNA shows they are linked to the Yamnaya, pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, who were considered the origin of many Indo-European languages. They were also influenced by the Bel Eker culture, with the R1b haplogroup prevalent in Britain, Ireland, France, and Spain. However, modern Celtic communities do not have a homogeneous genetic structure that are integrated into the Western European gene pool over thousands. This reinforces the view that Celts today are a cultural linguistic concept, not a pure ethnic group. Thus, if Celts are a flexible cultural concept rather than a homogeneous ethnic entity, their appearance in many different regions, from Spain to Turkey, is the result of partial diffusion, rather than a single migration. From around the 5th century BCE, Celtic communities spread across Europe, starting from Britain and Ireland. They occupied Gaul, modern-day France, then attacked the Italian peninsula, even sacking the capital Rome of the Roman Republic around 390 BCE. Later appearing in the Balkans and Anatolia, where a community settled in the region called Galatia around the 3rd century BCE. However, under Roman rule, the Celts were gradually conquered and assimilated, especially on the continent by migrations of Germanic peoples. So only remote areas like Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, as well as Cornwall or the Isle of Man outside Roman control, maintained cultural and linguistic traditions. Additionally, one group migrated to Brittany and formed the Breton community. But over time, the central governments of Britain and France implemented assimilation policies, causing minority languages and cultures to gradually decline. After the period of decline, from the 18th century, along with the Romantic movement and nationalism, the image of the Celts was revived as a symbol of identity. Today, the concept of Celtic nations refers to territories where Celtic languages and cultures still survive, including Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, the Isle of Man, and the Brittany region. Additionally, other areas such as Galatia and Asturias in Spain, or Switzerland in Central Europe, although no longer having Celtic languages, still retain Celtic cultural elements or language, the foundation of connection. As one of the most distinct surviving marks from the Celtic world, language serves as a bridge across time, helping us access their thinking and identity. Celtic languages belong to the Indo-European language family and are divided into two groups. Among them, the continental Celtic group was once spoken in many places like France, Spain, Germany, and Turkey, but gradually disappeared after the Roman. Languages in this group do not leave many documents, with most surviving only as a few lines of inscriptions on stone cells, along with brief descriptions in Greek and Roman books. Notably, Gaulish is the most clearly recorded language. In contrast, the insular Celtic group is better preserved, consisting of two. First is Brittonic, once widely spoken in Great Britain, later developing into languages such as Welsh, Cornish and Breton in the Brittany Peninsula of France. Second is Boudicca, including modern languages such as Scottish Gaelic, Irish, and Manx. Regarding structural characteristics, this language type stands out with a rich phonetic system, distinctive grammatical structure, and vocabulary. Typical features include noun inflection for gender, number, and case, and initial consonant mutation, clearly demonstrated in Welsh and Irish. In terms of phonetics, these languages have soft intonation, stress on the first syllable, and use many rare phonemes. Regarding writing, Old Celtic mainly existed in carved form, using borrowed writing systems, Greek and especially Ogham, the characteristic rock-carved script system of ancient Ireland. But they developed an oral transmission method, thanks to the role of poets, monks, and intellectuals. While the intricate decorative art in the Latinate style is also a form of highly symbolic non-literate, today modern Celtic languages all use the Latin alphabet, each language having its own spelling system, reflecting language contact and transformation. Although declining due to domination and modernization, the 21st century has witnessed a strong revival movement in Ireland, Wales, and Brittany. Currently, it is gradually reviving, not only as a communication tool, but also as a cultural symbol present in music, literature, education, and festivals. Social organization. Society in the pre-Christian period was mainly organized according to monarchical and stratified with three class structures. First, the warrior nobility, followed by the intellectual class including priests, lawyers, poets, and finally commoners. In some areas, especially those with deep contact with Rome, republican institutions controlled by the elite class and patron-client relationships similar to those in Rome were also recorded, thereby showing changes in social organization under the influence of this civilization. Besides the three main classes, the slave system also exists. These people were often captured in war, sold due to debt, or born into slavery. They could be transferred, but in some cases would also be freed. Another distinctive feature is the power succession system. In Ireland and Scotland, the Celts applied the tanistry system, where the successor was not the king's son but a competent adult male member of the clan, usually selected by a council of nobles. This method, while flexible in avoiding inheritance by the incompetent, also often led to internal conflicts, especially when it clashed with a hereditary feudal model introduced later from continental Europe. Celtic trade. Before the Roman era, the Celts were already an active part of the transcontinental European trade network when they established trail routes to transport goods using wheeled vehicles. Thanks to possessing many rare resources such as tin, iron, gold, and silver, this community early stood out. With sophisticated metallurgical techniques, specializing in producing weapons, jewelry, and crafts, many of these products were exported to the Asian market. In terms of currency, besides bartering goods, this community also used primitive money such as bronze axes, sickles, and coins made of gold, silver, and copper. Not only skilled in commercial exchange, the Celts were also famous for their banquet culture. Lavish feasts were the center of social life, where the nobility both established connections with their subordinates and displayed their wealth and power. In these feasts, seating positions and meat portions clearly reflected social hierarchy and reinforced class identity. Feasts also carried sacred significance, with banquet utensils often buried with the deceased, expressing the belief that they would continue feasting with deities in the afterlife. Regarding gender concepts, unlike the strict stereotypes of contemporary Greek, Celtic society seemed to have a more flexible and diverse view of gender, both in daily life and ritual. Much archaeological evidence shows that Celtic women could hold prominent roles, even as warriors or leaders. Some tombs, like the Vix Lady's tomb in France, contain both jewelry and weapons, indicating that gender wasn't completely tied to burial goods and reflected social status. In many cases, weapon-containing graves were assumed to be male, though archaeology identified the skeletons as female. This reflects the somewhat different role of women in Celtic society, where they were less restricted compared to Greco-Roman society, which placed women in secondary positions. Meanwhile, the Brian law system in late ancient Ireland also indicated women had rights to divorce and property ownership in certain cases, even when husbands were impotent or unfaithful. Some ancient records also mention openness in Celtic sexual relationships, including homosexual relationships between men. However, modern researchers believe many details in ancient texts may have been exaggerated or misunderstood, as writers often had biases or wanted to emphasize Celtic differences to contrast with Roman civilization. Its social organization and trade networks reflected stability in this community's life. Then the art of war was the element shaping Celtic power relationships. Since transforming into the Latine culture, a warrior aristocracy society, they were clearly influenced by Greece and the Mediterranean, especially in metallurgy, military aesthetics, and combat techniques. Celtic military equipment was very diverse, including double-edged swords, spears, javelins, wooden shields, hard fabric armor or chainmail, precursors to Roman armor. This community also used carnixes to signal in battle, showing a certain level of organization and meanwhile, horses played a central role in war culture, serving both as combat vehicles and symbols of power and sanctity. Initially, these animals were mainly used to pull war chariots. But later, as combat skills developed, Celtic cavalry also emerged, with flexibility across all terrains. In beliefs, horses were also associated with deities like Epona or Macha. Additionally, archery and boar hunting were essential parts of warrior training and noble status affirmation. Here, Celtic dog breeding techniques were so prominent and advanced that dogs were exported to Rome. In tactics, the Celts favored reins, focusing on speed and power over organization. They would fight in groups using long swords for slashing. Some warriors even fought naked to symbolize courage and defiance. Particularly, head hunting played a central role in Celtic belief, as heads were seen as containers of soul and spiritual power. Therefore, enemy skulls were often brought back for display or used in rituals, sometimes gilded or used as cups to demonstrate authority. The spiritual world and mystical rituals. The Celts had a rich polytheistic belief system closely linked to nature, community life, and ritual practices. Though they left no canonical texts, they built a profound spiritual world through oral tradition, symbols, and rituals. Celtic mythology was diverse, with universal figures like Lu as god of light, arts, and crafts, Cernunnos as god of forests and animals, Epona as horse goddess, Dagda and Seychellos as agricultural patron gods, along with various local deities. while the center of Celtic spiritual life was the druids, the priestly scholar class. They not only presided over rituals and mediated with deities but also preserved knowledge and taught orally through generations. From the 2nd century BC, Celtic beliefs began being influenced by Greece and Rome, creating mixed temples and syncretizing deities with Mediterranean gods. Under Christian influence, especially from the 5th century onward, Celtic beliefs gradually declined, but many elements like mythology, seasonal festivals, and goddess imagery persisted in local culture. Today, some neo-pagan and Wiccan movements have revived ancient rituals in Celtic mythology as part of the ancient European spiritual heritage, thereby reaffirming distinct identities that were once forgotten. Distinctive spiritual ritual practice. For the Celts, natural elements such as forests, streams, marshes, and rivers were considered sacred, serving as dwelling places for deities. Therefore, sacrificial rituals were performed at sacred sites like forests or wetlands, involving offerings of weapons, valuable items, animals, and possibly humans. Although there's considerable archaeological evidence showing that some individuals in Celtic culture were killed intentionally through methods like strangulation, decapitation, or heart-piercing, whether these were sacrificial rituals or some scholars argue this was deity worship because victims were buried alongside animals or valuables, reflecting beliefs in exchange between humans and the divine world. Meanwhile, many other researchers emphasize the possibility that these deaths resulted from punishment, warfare, or non-religious initiation rites. In Ireland, odd bodies like Cloney Cavan Man or Old Crogan Man, with intact bodies showing signs of strangulation, throat cutting, and notably severed nipples, are seen as indicators of special rituals possibly related to sacrificing former leaders during crises. However, due to the lack of texts or direct accounts from the Celts themselves, current hypotheses mainly rely on speculation and perspectives from Greek and Roman observers who were biased against Celtic culture. Thus, attributing all unusual deaths to religious rituals is not entirely accurate. Notably, today's Halloween festival originates from Samhain, an important seasonal transition ritual in the ancient Celts, held on the night of October 31st, marking the end of the harvest and the beginning of the darker. In Celtic belief, this was when the boundary between the living world and the afterlife became thin and spirits could return to Earth. Therefore, to appease and protect against supernatural forces, communities held rituals like masking, bonfires, carving turnips into lanterns, and making offerings. Later, when Irish immigrants came to America in the 19th century, they brought the Samhain tradition, blending it with Christianity and local culture to form modern Halloween. Although much changed in form, the festival today still preserves traces of a Celtic worldview about the interaction between life and the otherworld in a natural cycle. Celts also had relatively distinct funeral customs with elaborate arrangements, especially for the nobility, as seen in large burial mounds and complex interment structures. During the Hallstatt period, the deceased were often placed in wooden burial chambers inside artificial mounds up to tens of meters in diameter, exemplified by the Vix Princess tomb in France or the Hotdorf chieftain's grave in Germany. Moving into the La Tène period, noble warriors were buried with swords, spears, armor, and chariots, while commoners had only broken weapons or a few pottery items, clearly showing social stratification, and burial forms varied by region. Recently, a burial chamber in Willingen, in modern-day Germany, dating to around 585 AD, was discovered by archaeologists. The chamber was made of a single oak log, over 4 meters long, within a 6. Inside were artifacts like bronze nails from a funeral cart, a wooden shovel. This helped archaeologists reconstruct a complete noble Celtic funeral, where wealth, power, and belief intertwined in the consciousness of sending the deceased to the afterlife. A culture with distinctive symbols. Celtic art developed richly over centuries, reflecting a blend of indigenous traditions combined with influences from Rome, Anglo-Saxons, and Christianity. In the late antique and early medieval periods, Celtic communities created many unique art forms. Exemplary is the Boudicca shield, a bronze object decorated with enamel from the Anglo-Saxon. Next are Gospel manuscripts, filled with geometric and interlacing patterns, or High Celtic stone crosses with elaborate religious carvings, common in Ireland. Additionally, Pictish stones by the Picts in Scotland represent the peak of stone carving, partly becoming iconic heritage of medieval Celtic art. A prime example of Celtic symbolic and abstract representation is the Celtic mace. This is a spiral pattern with straight-line designs, created in interlacing style, appearing worldwide since prehistoric times. These patterns often start from basic shapes, like interlacing V's or lozenges, then develop into spirals by connecting points, similar to dot-to-dot games, creating rhythmic and tightly structured designs. Not stopping there, the Coligny calendar also shows the temporal and cosmic thinking of ancient Celts. This calendar was inscribed on a large bronze plate in Celtic Latin script, dating to the 2nd century. It reflects a complex timekeeping system based on a lunisolar calendar with a year of 12 months, intercalating with leap months to adjust to the solar cycle, each month divided into light and dark halves, reflecting the dualistic concept of light and darkness, growth and decay. They also divided the year into 4 major festival periods, aligned with agriculture. First is Imbolc on February 1st, signaling the return of light and winter's end. Next is Beltane on May 1st, beginning summer and the breeding season. Then Lunasa on August 1st is the harvest festival. And Samhain on November 1st marks the spiritual new year and entry into the darker half of the year. These are not just agricultural milestones, but occasions for communities to hold rituals, tribal gatherings, and power transit. Regarding residential architecture, the most common house type for Celts was the roundhouse, built with locally available materials. With simple yet effective design, each house typically had a single room, where a central hearth served for cooking and heating, and smoke escaped through a hole in the roof. The round structure also reduced wind force and retained heat better in temperate or cold climate. For group living residents or enclosed settlements, often called hillforts on hills, they were surrounded by wooden palisades or earthen walls for protection. Some larger settlements also had storage facilities, livestock pens, and complex defense systems. Although they did not weave monumental stone structures like the Romans or Greeks, Celtic architecture clearly showed practicality, adaptability to the environment, and strong community cohesion. Clothing and jewelry. Celtic clothing and jewelry were not just daily items but clearly reflected their social status, lifestyle, and worldview in ancient times. Regarding attire, this community typically wears long-sleeved shirts made of linen or wool, paired with tight-fitting stretch pants called brochet, suitable for horseback riding or combat. On the outside, they wear large woolen cloaks, fastened with fibula pins. Notably, checkered or square patterns often appear on cloaks or wraps, which are distinctive and common among the nobility, considered precursors to modern Scottish tartan. Additionally, some types of headwear like the Waterloo horned helmet were elaborately crafted for symbolic ritual purposes. While jewelry is considered the clearest expression of symbolism, status, and reverence in Celtic society, the most prominent is the torque necklace, a spiral ring made of gold, silver, or bronze worn around the neck to symbolize the power and dignity of nobles and warriors. This type of necklace is also depicted in images of deities like the god Cernunnos on the undisturbed cauldron, thereby showing the sanctification of power in Celtic art. Along with the torque, they also used bracelets, fibula pins, bronze mirrors with intricate patterns, and elaborately decorated drinking horns. Many other items such as sword scabbards, reins, horses, wine containers, or ritual objects were also carved, enamel inlaid, or shaped with rhythm. It can be seen that, like their characteristic spiral patterns, Celtic origins do not follow a straight line but are a series of interwoven layers, where each historical cycle repeats with a new nuance, demonstrating the enduring existence of a once-forgotten identity. And above is the comprehensive picture of Celtic origins. Hello and see you again in the next videos.